Could Mark Zuckerberg be forced to give up WhatsApp and Instagram, the jewels in the crown of his company, Meta? Well, if US regulators have their way, maybe he will. We'll discuss what that could be about on this episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, and shortly we will be talking about Katy Perry going into space. But don't worry, it won't be all about pop stars, it will actually be about the business of space, which is very, very interesting, and there's a lot going on there. But first of all, talking of business, we are going to go to a courtroom in Washington, D.C., where today, on Monday, when we're recording this episode of Newscast, a trial has begun where it is Meta, the owners of Facebook, versus the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, who are the trade, competition and consumer body in America. And the FTC are alleging that Meta basically gave itself a monopoly on social media when it bought Instagram in 2012 and WhatsApp in 2014. So, what is going on? And could the consequences of this really be that Mark Zuckerberg has to sell Instagram and WhatsApp, which are really quite important bits of his company? The people who can answer that are here in the studio joining me. Mariana Spring. Hello, Mariana.
Hello.
Remind me what your job title is now.
I am social media investigations correspondent.
An all-round expert. And also joining us is Mark Scott, who used to be chief technology correspondent for Politico, but is now a senior resident fellow at the Atlantic Council. Hello, Mark.
Hello, nice to be here.
Right, thanks for joining us. Mariana, give us the bare bones about what this case is actually about, or what it initially appears to be about.
So the case on the surface of it, and this is a case that the kind of process of this started actually during Donald Trump's first presidency, so it's been a kind of long time coming, is all around these antitrust laws. So this idea that, or the accusation, the allegation that Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp, has been trying to get rid of the competition by buying up those different companies. So it bought Instagram in 2012, and you might I remember when that happened actually, and WhatsApp in 2014. And yeah, essentially this idea that they've given themselves a monopoly. That's the accusation. Meta has obviously contested this, and that's why this case is unfolding now and happening in this way, defending themselves. They have said previously that they're very sure that they will win the case. Experts that the BBC have spoken to and who've kind of been analysing what's been going on have suggested that they're basically going to say, well, actually, the user experience on Instagram is a lot better than it was back when we first bought it, and therefore that kind of trumps the competition laws. But I think what's interesting here is not just the kind of antitrust stuff and the actual basis of the case, but the wider political context in which this is unfolding, because we've now got Donald Trump who's president, and he seems to like Mark Zuckerberg a bit more than he did before.
Well, we'll come on to that in a second. But Mark, what is it about the process we're in here that means this is happening now? Because as Mariana said, this all started when Trump was president the first time.
Yeah, so the thing is with antitrust cases, they take a long time. And we're talking half a decade to a decade for particularly in the US. So this began with Trump 1.0. It's probably going to finish potentially in Trump 2.0. And we still don't know what's going to happen. And even in this case, it starts today, the 14th of April. It's probably going to trundle on until early July. So we have a lot of testimony ahead of us to figure out exactly what's going on here.
Do the Federal Trade Commission have a smoking gun here, or what they would perceive as a smoking gun?
Well, there is some evidence that they seem to have that could be very useful, I imagine, to their lawyers, that takes the form of email correspondence. So there's, for example, some emails from Mark Zuckerberg and one from 2008, which has been quoted a fair bit, where he says it's better to buy than compete. And this is kind of central to their argument of, look, this has always been your philosophy, so this is what you were doing.
Yeah, rather than invent your own product and compete, you just buy someone else's.
You just kind of gobble everything up, exactly. Right. And so I imagine it will be a lot of that kind of evidence, and then obviously the testimony that they give in person. And you imagine that Mark Zuckerberg would try and explain that away either by saying, well, this was ages before these purchases you're referring to, or, you know, well, that's a broad strategy that lots of business people would have, and we've still improved the platforms, etc., etc.
I mean, what's the FTC's answer to what Meta says, which is, oh, if we integrate all these services, it's great for consumers because they can have a seamless experience where they see more good stuff. What is the opposite case to that?
Okay, so let me put on my FTC commission hat here for a second and help
Glad you've got one to hand.
Yeah, well, it comes with it in the starter pack. So the FTC basically say that Meta has created a legal monopoly around social media platforms, specifically via its acquisitions of Instagram and WhatsApp. Its basic contention is, and I won't bore you with some of the Sherman Act legislation in the US, but what it's basically saying is Meta had a buy or bury strategy when it comes to its rivals. Either you buy them like it did with Instagram and WhatsApp, or you bury them by just taking away the oxygen because they can't access some of the Facebook services, which, to Mariana's point, is some of the emails that will probably come out in the trial. And that is the accusation that the FTC is trying to prove over the next 8 weeks, that by taking over these rival social media platforms, Facebook, now Meta, have sort of strangled competition within the wider social media space because no one else can compete because of the network effects. It doesn't really make sense because no one currently uses social media by just staying within Meta. No one solely uses Instagram without having a TikTok account, or, you know, if you're my age, a LinkedIn account, or whatever else it is, right? Social media is a lot broader than Meta, and therefore what the FTC really need to prove to a judge who is already very skeptical of their arguments is currently social media is defined almost exclusively via Meta's platforms. And frankly, it's hard to see that that's the case in 2025.
And Mark, let's theorize for a second now and do a bit of guesswork. Like, what's the most dramatic outcome that there could potentially be of this?
So let's fast forward till maybe the end of the Trump 2.0 administration. We have finally gone through all the appeals. There could be a case where Meta has to sell Instagram and WhatsApp to someone else. And that is the nuclear option, the sort of push the red button. That's the worst case scenario for Meta. To be honest, I don't think that's going to happen. These acquisitions happened over a decade ago, and it's very unlikely for them to be unwound or sold off after so much time, particularly when the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission at the time, approved the deals. So they're going to try and go back now and figure out, you know, maybe they made a mistake, but Meta obviously would say they did not.
Although, didn't the FTC always say from the beginning of this they would monitor the situation, and if the market vibes changed or it felt like Meta's position had changed, they would act again?
They would, but I covered the acquisition back in 2014, and I don't remember anyone saying $19 billion for a WhatsApp service that made no money was a good investment. Everyone at the time thought there was a complete crazy thing to do, to spend that amount of money on something that frankly made no cash, particularly as it was not really known. WhatsApp wasn't known in the US at the time. So yes, they were going to look at it, but going back, it's hard to see anyone thinking this was some sort of Zuckerberg-esque effort to sort of skew the market, because at the time, no one thought this was a good deal.
Mariana, you talked about the political context. Just explain what you were getting at there. I mean, we all know what you're getting at in big terms.
So the case was launched when he was kind of outgoing as president. And that was at the time when also the January the 6th riots happened. And there was lots of debate and questions over the removal of Donald Trump from Meta's platforms like Facebook. And there was a real frostiness, it certainly appeared, in the relationship between Mark Zuckerberg, who's in charge of Meta, and Donald Trump. Since then, since Donald Trump became not president and then president again, that has really shifted, not least because Donald Trump seems to be more closely allied with the social media bosses, the tech bros, than he was the first time around. That means not only Elon Musk, who I feel like I spend almost every minute of every day talking about, who owns X, but also Mark Zuckerberg, who's made various changes. Like, for example, Donald Trump is like back on all the platforms and stuff, but also they've scrapped, for example, a fact-checking label system that they had in America, so not in Europe, but in the States. They got rid of that, and there was this video that Mark Zuckerberg did with his chain and his new sort of look, saying, freedom of expression is the most important thing, and we've made mistakes before, we don't want to make mistakes. A lot of that really matches up with what Donald Trump thinks and feels about freedom of expression, for example, and the views he's expressed around social media companies, moderation, and so on. So there's this suggestion that Mark Zuckerberg has become sort of on good terms again with Donald Trump. And there's also been some reporting to suggest that there's been lobbying going on behind the scenes. Meta were contacted by the BBC to try and confirm some of that reporting, and came back and didn't directly address those accusations, and instead said, I'll find what they said. Oh, yeah.
It's actually quite a good quote.
Yeah, so when they were asked by the BBC to confirm this, it was the Wall Street Journal who'd originally reported this stuff about lobbying Trump to basically drop the case in person as well. And there's been reports of him going to Mar-a-Lago and places before this as well. Meta sidestepped the question, said in the statement, the FTC's lawsuits against Meta defies reality. More than 10 years after the FTC reviewed and cleared our acquisitions, the Commission's action in this case sends the message that no deal is ever truly final. So you've got this context happening. You've then also got interesting moves by Donald Trump, for example, to fire 2 of the FTC commissioners that he made in March, and that's kind of clouding the case a little bit. So there are these 2 Democrats, Rebecca Kelly Slaughter and Alvaro Bedoya, I hope I'm saying that right.
Who were on the Trade Commission.
Yeah, they were in the minority of the kind of 5-seat commission. And until Wednesday, just 2 seats of those seats were filled, both by Republicans. And so Slaughter and Bedoya are now suing the Trump administration to be reinstated because they basically think they've been pushed out and they're kind of intimidated. But it's just quite interesting because, again, it's like, to what extent is this recalibrating how a case like this could or will unfold? Third thing that's worth mentioning is also the fact that you've got the wider social media context here. So TikTok, for example, which there's been a lot of debate about its ownership, accusations that it's kind of connected to the Chinese state, which TikTok and ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok, deny. But it has meant that it's been ruled, and that the judgment was upheld, that TikTok has at the moment got to be sold so that that's not the case, or perhaps sold in part. Trump then issued this kind of reprieve, this 90-day and then 75-day extension to stop that happening. But the reason this is all relevant is because there's then this question about, you know, Meta could argue, well, hang on a second, you're really worried about Chinese ownership of social media companies. Look, we're an American company. We're competing against China and some of the different services they offer, like TikTok, for example, and therefore that could be part of their argument. And Meta had said in a statement that some of the evidence at the trial will show, to quote, what every 17-year-old in the world knows: Instagram, Facebook and WhatsApp compete with Chinese-owned TikTok, YouTube, X, iMessage and many others.
Although it says Chinese-owned TikTok.
Oh, yeah, sorry, YouTube. I was just thinking,
yeah, YouTube's not owned by China.
YouTube. Yeah, true.
And I mean, on all that, politics is absolutely fascinating and something definitely to watch over the next few years. But Mark, I just wonder, in this actual legal process here, does politics come into it at all? Or is this not just a regulator versus a company in front of a judge?
So it's a little bit different in the US than, say, in the UK, because this is it's the equivalent of the Competition and Markets Authority here in the UK taking a case in an independent court against a company. So that the judicial process is completely apolitical, because that's how the branches of government work in the US. But there is an ongoing sort of hearts and minds battle within the MAGA movement in the US about the role of big tech in society. So as Mariana mentioned, there's been a lot of pushback on the likes of Facebook on how they dealt with Donald Trump, particularly after the January 6th riots on Capitol Hill. But there's a whole other part of the MAGA movement who doesn't like big tech because they think they're sort of killing the economy by sort of dominating the online market, etc. So J.D. Vance, the current US vice president, was a big fan of the former head of the FTC, a lady called Lina Khan, who was nominated by Biden. And Vance liked Khan mostly because she was going after big tech. So there is this friction within the MAGA movement of some want to support American businesses against, say, China, as Mariana mentioned, and the other half who see big tech as the problem because they are killing and throttling the US economy. So that is what's playing out in the MAGA movement around this trial with Meta.
So, Mark, are you sort of suggesting that the outcome of this trial is a bit of a sideshow, or not a sideshow? That's the wrong word, but it's not the only show in town. The other show in town is like, actually, what is the true soul of the Trump administration? Is it standing up for consumers and therefore having lots of companies providing lots of cheaper, easy to use, good products, or if it's the fact that the Trump administration is on the side of big, wealthy American companies? There's going to be a revelation in the next year or so.
All of that and more, right? So this is about the heart and soul of the MAGA movement. It's about the role of the Federal Trade Commission to hold a big tech company to account. It's the role of US social media versus Chinese-based social media. And it's also, to be frank, the role of Donald Trump and his ability to potentially cut a deal with Mark Zuckerberg to end this case at some point via the Federal Trade Commission. So all of that's happening over 8 weeks, which is why, again, people who follow tech policy like me get super geeky and wonky on this stuff. But it does it does encompass all of that within, and then you have the inherent tension of, say, Mark Zuckerberg taking the stand in Washington D.C. and giving testimony. That in itself is blockbuster stuff.
And I'm going to give full credit to Jack, who is editing today's episode of Newscast, who's just messaged me on WhatsApp, full transparency, owned by Meta, saying, oh, it reminds him a bit of the whole Trump tariff policy that you've got one side of the White House thinks one thing and the other side of the White House thinks the other. So thank you for that contribution as well, Newscast Jack. Mariana, I'm really struck by you saying you remember when Meta bought Instagram.
Yeah.
Talk about that time. What do you remember?
Well, because that was...
Because I remember that it happened, but I don't remember. We got different jobs, so it was.
No, well, yeah, I guess I remember it, but I guess at that time, unless I'd had a premonition, I didn't quite know I'm doing this job. But I think it's because it's actually when essentially around the time that I first got social media, and one of the first things I ever got was Instagram, and I remember when it kind of changed over, and it was like, oh, it's now owned by Meta. And I remember the same with WhatsApp, like, you know, when you used to open the app and then you could see that it was Meta owned. Not that it really, like, I guess made that much of a difference, but you have seen the evolution of, certainly in recent years, Instagram, for example, Instagram Reels. You can access them on Facebook too, these short form videos, but they are the main way, really, that Meta has tried to compete with TikTok. And in the kind of age of what we call the algorithmic For You page, like you get served up stuff from anyone and everyone. That's so different from what Instagram was when I first signed up. I think it's one of the things that's had the biggest impact on the world, because it means people see stuff they never would have encountered before, for bad or for good. But also, if you're Mark Zuckerberg, you would not be very keen on these. Like, if you think about Facebook now and what it's used for, like there are Facebook groups, sure, there are some communities, people might use Facebook Marketplace, but broadly, the evidence suggests that an older cohort of people use Facebook. Whereas if you're thinking about the longevity of your company and its future, like Instagram and WhatsApp are so important. And there are certain markets where WhatsApp is such a big deal. Think of India, think of Brazil. Like, you would be worried about losing those assets, I think. And so you can imagine that they're going to fight pretty hard to not lose them.
Mariana, thank you.
Thank you so much.
And Mark, thanks to you too.
Thanks for having me.
Now, as promised, Katy Perry has gone into space, or well, the very edge of the atmosphere, and she was accompanied by 5 other female so-called astronauts, which included TV personalities, some scientists, and the fiancé of Jeff Bezos, who is the owner of Amazon. And they were travelling on a rocket and a capsule made by Jeff Bezos's rocket company, Blue Origin. So is this all a publicity stunt, like when Jeff Bezos sent Captain Kirk, William Shatner, up into space recently? Or is there something actually more strategic going on here? The people who can answer those questions are joining us now on Newscast. Let's say hello to Professor Suzie Imber, who's a professor of space physics at the University of Leicester. Hello, Professor Imber.
Hi, Adam.
Is it true you're also an aspiring astronaut?
Yes, that is true, actually.
Oh,
yeah,
how's the aspiring going?
Yeah, still going. Thanks.
Okay, well, good luck. And also joining us is my former colleague, the used to be BBC science correspondent, is now a freelance science journalist. It's Jonathan Amos. Hello, Jonathan.
Hi, Adam. Yeah, I'm not aspiring. And I don't like roller coasters, which this rocket launch was a bit like if you were inside.
Well, this is the thing. So I've got to confess, we were actually recording an episode of Newscast to go out on Good Friday, which is kind of a big historical episode about something else. So I missed the drama of my favourite pop star, Katy Perry, going into space. Jonathan, can you please just give me a little potted version of actually what happened?
So they were riding in this rocket that belongs to Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon.com. It's called New Shepard, named after Alan Shepard, the first American in space, way back in 1961. It's quite a small rocket, but it's got a capsule on the top, and they put 6 people inside it. And Jeff Bezos' fiancée, we should call her, shouldn't we? Lauren Sanchez invited a few of her friends along, including the aforementioned Katy Perry. They lifted off. And they climbed to an altitude of just over 100 kilometers, which means they sort of qualify for getting into space. It's a bit of an arbitrary line, but yes, that's the one that we use. And the capsule comes off the top of the rocket on the way up, and they experience about 4 minutes of weightlessness. They can float around, do their thing, look out the window. They were very excited at seeing the moon from up there, and then they came down. Parachutes opened, they landed in the West Texas desert, and Lauren was the first out the door, and she gave her fiancé a big hug and a kiss, and then they all jumped out and kissed the ground, and everybody was happy. How does that do?
Excellent potted summary. Although I feel you could have done with a bit more singing in there, because Katy Perry did sing when she was up there.
She did, yes, she did.
Let's hear a little bit of Lauren Sanchez and then Katy Perry once they touch down.
I don't think you can describe it, because, what I was saying, it was like quiet, but then also really alive. And you look at it and you're like, we're all in this together. It's not about me. It's not about singing my songs. It's about a collective energy in there. It's about us. It's about making space for future women and taking up space and belonging. And it's about this wonderful world that we see right out there and appreciating it. This is all for the benefit of Earth.
Okay, Suzie, what's your take on that second thing Katy Perry said, that this is for the benefit of all of Earth, and also that first thing she said, that basically this was a sort of feminist act?
Well, if you think a little bit about Blue Origin itself and what Jeff Bezos has talked about in the past, then you have to see this trip as one in a series of launches. So this is not unusual. There's been a number of people that have taken this journey before. But what Jeff Bezos has said publicly is that his goal really is to try to protect the planet and think about developing off-planet industry and technology. So he is seeing a bigger picture in his goal of Blue Origin itself, and this is just a small part of that. In terms of this being a huge feminist act, well, it's true. It is the first all-women crew since Valentina Tereshkova, which was a one-woman trip to space. And that's great. And I think if this journey inspires somebody to think about having a career in science in the future, then that's a really good thing, and we should celebrate that.
And Jonathan, what is the business angle here? Like, why is Jeff Bezos doing this? Is it a marketing thing? Is it a treat for his fiance? Is there a sort of genuine strategic thing going on here?
I thought you were going to ask me to sing along with Louis Armstrong.
Because that's
and
what
I
Katy
think to
Perry said.
myself, what a wonderful world, or something like that, isn't it?
You know that song has a tune, Jonathan. Anyway,
no, but I mean, seriously, for Jeff Bezos, this particular rocket is a technology testing ground. So he's developing the technologies in this system to allow him to launch and land a much larger rocket, which is called New Glenn. And if you're talking about the future of commercial space, then New Glenn is really what Blue Origin is about. That's the rocket that's going to go up against, well, Elon Musk's current rocket, the Falcon 9, although he has an even bigger rocket coming called the Starship. And so a lot of the sort of technologies, the software, avionics, all that kind of stuff, that has been developed in New Shepard, and that is being rolled forward into New Glenn. So that's the serious side of it. I mean, as to the sort of publicity of seeing various individuals go up to 100 kilometers, I mean, I had a little look back. There's been 80 space tourists now. And you really have to do something sort of out of the ordinary to grab the headlines, don't you? It's become unnoticeable. Only when your fiance goes up or William Shatner, Captain Kirk goes up, do we see headlines. Most of the time now, these flights, they're ignored by and large by the mainstream media. This is New Shepard 31, so they've flown this thing 31 times in the past, 11 times with people on board, and it's become quite anonymous in that respect.
Now, Suzie, I get the impression you're a nice person, so you're going to be magnanimous and you're not going to be jealous of Katy Perry. But can you see, like, how do you feel about Katy Perry, an amateur and a singer, going into space when actually you're still aspiring to go into space? You haven't had the chance yet.
Well, if someone wanted to buy me a ticket tomorrow, I would go. But I have to say that I would much prefer to train to be an astronaut with the European Space Agency. So I think, we need to really separate these two things. So these people had a journey to the edge of space, and they were passengers on that journey. So there was very little training required. Whereas if we think about the astronaut, I don't know, Tim Peake, let's say, who went to live on the International Space Station for 6 months. That's like being the pilot of the aircraft, and that requires many, many years of training. And so, if I had a preference, I would head in that direction. But for somebody like Katy Perry that has no history or experience or training, then this is an opportunity to go and look down on the planet from space. And I don't blame her at all for taking that opportunity.
Oh, interesting. So from your point of view, it's more about who gets to call themselves an astronaut that's the issue here, rather than who gets to go.
Well, there's a lot of sort of discussion around what defines an astronaut. If you just sort of scrape over the Kármán line, sitting passively in this capsule, does that make you an astronaut? And I wouldn't want to be kind of mean to anybody about this. If they can call themselves an astronaut, that's totally fine with me. But really, I think if we think about astronaut traditionally, I would tend towards saying that it's actually more of a career. It's more of a job, than being a passenger on a flight.
Now, Jonathan, you mentioned Jeff Bezos's rivalry with Elon Musk and his rockets. I've kind of lost track about, well, A, who's winning in that battle, and B, the whole NASA element here, because NASA buys these guys' services now. Who gets more money and custom from NASA?
Well, Elon Musk does currently. I mean, he has a near monopoly on getting people and things into space currently. It's partly because his technology is so good. It's also partly because everybody else has dropped the ball. If you look at all of the rocket companies around the world, they've all dropped the ball at the same time, and they are many years behind him in terms of technological development. So I don't blame Elon Musk for that. I congratulate him for what he has achieved. Quite remarkable. I think the thing that's slightly disappointed me about this particular event is that we're all talking about it because it's Jeff Bezos's fiance and Katy Perry. When it's been learnt that President Trump is about to send a budget request for NASA that cuts the agency off at its knees effectively if it's allowed to go through. So we're talking about a 1/5 cut in the agency's budget. And, everybody stands on the shoulders of giants. Elon Musk stands on the shoulders of giants. So does Jeff Bezos. That giant is NASA. And the Trump administration is talking about gutting space science. And in a way, that's really what we should be talking about today, and not talking about pop stars going above 100 kilometers.
Well, Suzie, do you want to chip in on that then, if that's what the conversation Jonathan thinks we should be having?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's exactly what we should be talking about. We should be thinking about the future of space science, why it's important, how essential it is for our society and our economy, and what a difference it will make when if NASA gets its budget cut by the amount that has been claimed. And as Jonathan said, we don't know whether this is going to go through or not, but certainly if it was to go through, it would just decimate the capability of the space science division. And it would have ripple effects across the globe for all of us who work closely with our colleagues at NASA.
But Suzie, if money is tight for whatever reason, political or otherwise, like why is a pound or a dollar spent on space travel better than a pound or a dollar spent on something else?
My argument really isn't that it's a pound or a dollar spent on space travel, but spent on space science and developing space technology. And if we think about how essential satellites are to our economy at the moment, I mean, everything we do is associated with space. It's fundamental, really, and it's embedded in our everyday lives. And so spending money on developing new technologies, looking to the future of space, whether that's off-planet manufacturing or industry, whether it's harnessing resources from space, all of these things are our future, and we've been moving at pace in that direction. And sort of to see that suddenly come to a grinding halt and possibly be decimated is really problematic.
And Jonathan, just make the case again for NASA then, because, I mean, if you're talking about innovation, well, we've just been talking about the two big innovators, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. Like NASA haven't invented an eye-catching, amazing piece of space technology for a while, or at least not one that's captured the world's imagination.
Oh, I would fundamentally disagree with that. I mean, yes, they should be getting out of the business of launching rockets, and they are getting out of the business of launching rockets. They're buying those services now from Elon Musk, and they will buy them from Jeff Bezos. But the area which could be cut if this budget proposal goes through, and I'm sure Congress will push back against it, Republicans as well as Democrats, they're going to gut space science. And it is in the area of space science, one thinks of planetary science, which will really suffer. You know, there's a piece of rock now in a titanium tube sitting inside the Perseverance rover, and it's called Sapphire Canyon. It was drilled by the rover back in July last year. That rock, that piece of rock, it's about the size of a finger, okay? That piece of rock has the features and the chemistry that look almost certain that it was modified by life, by bacterial life. Getting that piece of rock back to Earth into a laboratory is a super priority. This budget proposal that they are talking about would cancel Mars sample return. That rock would not get back to Earth. And that would be an utter travesty, an utter travesty. And I don't really understand why they're even thinking about this. It'll just allow the Chinese to launch a Mars sample return mission in the next few years. And I thought that was what Mr. Trump didn't want to see. He didn't want to see China beat America.
I'm just reminded.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, go ahead, Suzie.
I was just going to add that actually Mars sample return, of course, is critical, but there's lots of other missions that are still in the planning and development phase. So if you stop things now, you're not just stopping the things that were going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years. You're stopping programs that would be running for the next 20 or 30 years in their tracks. And so this really could have a profound impact on our ability to do space science across the solar system.
Okay, Professor Imber, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Jonathan, good to catch up. Good to catch up with you too.
Pleasure, Adam.
And that's all for this episode of Newscast. We will be back with another one very soon. Thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.